Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell, your host for this show and the creator of the Surviving to Thriving movement. Each week, we'll dive into the mindsets that keep us in survival mode and learn how to get on the path to a truly thriving life. If you're looking for a wake-up call and want some valuable tools to get there, you have come to the right place. After all, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. Now, let's head over to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. This is Amanda Solman, and I will be your host this week. And we've actually got some guests in the other two chairs. Instead of Mark, this week I am joined by two other folks off of our team, John Anderson and Christina Gallant. John, Christina, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, this week, the reason I've got John and Christina on is that we thought we would talk about what it is like to be a young leader. So a lot of the folks that we work with, they're still fairly early in their career, but might be in a place where they're starting to get leadership positions, not just informal, but actually formal with titles and teams to manage. And John, Christina, and I have all been in that position in our 20s, given teams to manage. And so we thought we would talk through kind of what our experiences are being young managers and young leaders, and then some things that we learned along the way that maybe other folks can learn from as well. So I figured to get us started, let's lay some groundwork. Let's go with some background. So Christina, maybe you can start us off. What was your journey into a formal leadership role?
Yeah. So in high school and college, I was in FFA. So at the chapter level, the local level, and then at the state level. So that was kind of my first taste of leadership outside of, me being a little sassy back at home. And so in college, I was involved in a lot of different organizations, varying from like young farmers and collegiate young farmers and ranchers to collegiate Republicans, kind of going through all of those organizations. And when I graduated from University of Delaware, I fully expected to have a job at DuPont. And it was during a time that the economy took a nosedive, especially on the East Coast. And so my position was actually eliminated about 32 days. It's pretty scarred into my memory before my start date. So I was faced with the choice to either move to a tiny town and work on a cotton publication or start looking for another job. I knew nothing about cotton, so I was like, I feel like I should actually look for another job. Fast forward, ran into a guy in the lobby and started chatting him up. He had dropped a pen, so I picked it up and handed it to him. 7 rounds of interviews later, I'd been accepted into the executive development program for Macy's East, which is a retail company. So total 180 from the direction that I thought I was going in. My parents, my family, my boyfriend at the time, like just totally plot twisted that situation. And that was my first formal management role. Was out of college. I completed the executive development program for Macy's and got placed in Baltimore. So yeah, I had a $3 million department with 21 employees, and we'll go into all those details. But yeah, it was the ag girl that wound up in the Chanel department. I don't really know how that happened.
That's awesome. I've actually never heard that backstory from you. So I love it. If you're listening, we took some notes ahead of this so we can kind of start thinking about the topic. And Christina, when you put down that you were 21 running a $3 million department, I had no idea what you were talking about. So that is a really interesting story. I like it. And yes, we will definitely get into kind of how that has evolved over time. But John, I'm going to let you dive in too. So walk us through kind of what were the early path for you to a leadership role, formal?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit different than Christina's, where I was never really in all them groups, like FFA and stuff like that. I played basketball as a captain of a basketball team, but I wouldn't really call that much of a leadership role. But really, my leadership role started after I graduated college and got into my career. I started working as a formulator in this nutrition company, and I was there for probably 4 years maybe 3 years until I really got my leadership role, my like actual like position, the title, right. But I had to work myself up there, and since I didn't have that training, like that FFA and all them other groups provide, for me, I had to learn the hard way. I had to take it upon myself a little bit more to kind of figure out what is a leader, and things like that, so I took it upon myself to start to develop, my leadership skills. And then I, like within the company, I won the Founders Award, within, the nutrition company, which I was told later that I was the youngest one to ever win that award within the company, which I thought that was pretty cool at the time. But then shortly after I won that, I got into more of the formal leadership role as far as like a research coordinator and then the formulation manager, working both of them with both teams at the same time. So that's kind of where, or how my leadership formed a little bit.
Yeah. So Christina mentioned that she, at least in that early position, was managing somewhere around a team of like 30 folks. John, how many people were you managing in your formulation manager, research coordinator type roles?
Mm-hmm. Well, not 30.
That's okay. Just out of curious.
No, I think at one point it was about like 8 or 9, two separate teams, a research team with some technicians, a manager, a barn manager, and some interns, and then also my formulation team, a group of other formulation specialists. So not quite as big as Christina's, which I'm thankful for, because that'd be pretty tough. And I understand why. So part of me, like when I came on, or when Amanda, you asked me to be on here, I was excited because, like, first of all, you, Amanda, and Christina are like two of the best young leaders that I know. So like, I'm going to be sitting here just soaking up all of your guys' knowledge so I can bring it and pay it forward. So I'm excited for that.
I'm too pregnant for those compliments. They'll have me crying over here on the other side of the screen.
Oh, that's too funny. I don't know, John. You might question that once I give my background on some of my path, but yeah. So Christina starting out kind of in retail management, John with research team management. My path really. So in my previous role, for anybody who's listened to this show before, I worked for a full service marketing agency, advertising agency. And I worked in account service. So I had always had client management responsibilities, which is kind of like managing a team, but not totally. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have any like employee management, right? I didn't have any direct reports or anything like that. But I moved my way up through the ladder, so to speak, pretty steadily. And so after about 3 years, I was actually offered a supervisor position. I had been doing some more informal management, like, hey, kind of really work closely with some of these younger employees, but it hadn't been formal. And honestly, when I was first offered the supervisor position, I turned it down, which, yes, that is an idiot move. Don't do that. But at the time, I really didn't feel ready. I was 26. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't manage people. Like I'm not ready for this. People who have manager in their title, like they're way more experienced and way more mature and way more ready for this than I am. And so like at the time I said, nope, that's fine. I'll just stay where I'm at. Thanks. Which again, really dumb. Don't do that. But about 2 months later, I finally came to my senses and I was like, well, if I'm going to be fulfilling all the roles of doing a management position, I might as well get paid to do it. So I was like, okay, never mind. I take that back. Can I have the title and the raise that goes with it? And of course they were all about that. But that was kind of funny because now looking back at it, I'm just like, why did I say no? And we will get into the reasons of why I said no. But yeah, so that was my journey into a more formal role. And John, I only had 1 or 2 people that I managed. So like, again, it doesn't have to be a big
Mm-hmm.
team. It's just, it's a good experience to be responsible for guiding some other folks. So we've got a wide range from 30 down to 2 in terms of direct reports. So I think that's a good background for where we're going to go with the rest of our conversation. So Christina, I'm going to swing back to you. Tell me now, so you started kind of in retail at Macy's. How has your leadership journey evolved since that time?
Yeah, so I was in retail at Macy's, obviously, and was definitely a little overwhelmed with the amount of responsibility from the jump. As a 21-year-old, I had people on my staff that were actually older than my parents. So there was a lot of ego awareness that came into that, both on my part and on theirs, that we both had things to learn from each other. And so I was also managed. So I was on a team there were 7 of us, and we had one direct manager. And I think the biggest takeaway I had there was what I didn't want to create, the kind of environment I did not want to create for my staff. So just a little backstory on that is that my dad had actually suffered from a stroke while I was at work. And so my family called me and they're like, we need you to come home. So I went to her and I said, I need to go be with my family. And my manager looked at me and told me I needed to reassess my priorities. And so I did, and I left my job. I did not stay on that team. I started looking for a job that night while I was at the hospital with my dad. So, it's nothing against the company. It's nothing against, I had a phenomenal team that actually worked really, really hard for me. And I am grateful to them for all that they did. And I learned from my direct boss exactly who I did not want to be, whether I had a team of 1 or a team of 100. And that was a big management lesson for me, is that you can learn just as much from someone that you don't want to emulate as someone that's in a management role that you do. So I left there and I actually went back to my roots at FFA, and I was a regional manager. So it was totally different because the territory that I was managing didn't work for me. So I needed them just as much as they needed me in order to get my job done. And that was a totally different, I didn't have any direct reports at FFA, but what I was managing was a territory of states and accounts. From there, I went and worked again at another agriculture company. Well, they were a curriculum company. So I was a brand manager. So I helped direct the brand. So again, I only had 2 direct reports. That wasn't nearly the size of Macy's. And then I needed to move back to the East Coast. So I left my job there, moved back to the East Coast to be closer to family, and then started working at Lululemon. So I found myself back in retail, which I swore up and down I would never go back to retail ever again. And it started as I was just using it as a filler job to find out what I wanted to actually be when I grew up, right? And fast forward, it was my second day of training there, and I started to learn more about the culture of Lululemon and what they're a stand for around like training and development and community, and fell completely in love. So my team has ranged in size from 13 direct reports, from 4 direct reports, all the way up to 45 direct reports, just depending on the time of year and the business that the quarterly business needs. So some are temporary, some are permanent roles. And yeah, that's been my journey through management.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And then, John, I think you and I are kind of in similar places where we manage folks in our last role, but we don't have any direct reports in our current role here at MJST, other than, working with clients and that sort of thing. It's a little different here because we're so small, right? We're 4 people with 2 primary contractors, of which Christina is one of them. And so we all report to Mark. Like, the team's not big, not super big. So Mark is all of our bosses. But obviously we're hoping to grow the team eventually. And so maybe that'll change in the future. But I think that highlights, more informal leadership, I would say, right? Like, I don't have positional leadership with other teammates, but obviously there's a way to serve as a leader without having direct reports.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean,
So, oh, go ahead.
yeah, 'cause, I mean, leadership, really, leadership's not. It doesn't always have to be a title, right? You know, leadership is influence. You know, if you listen to John Maxwell at all, and that's what Amanda and Christina. That's what we do. You know, we may not be leading. Well, Christina, you probably still are, but Amanda and I, we're not leading people directly, but on our coaching calls, we're leading people. We're influencing people, and really, we're influencing other companies' leaders. You know, and that's, to me, that even is more powerful than being the direct leader, you know, because we get to touch so many more people and so many more leaders than just our direct reports. So that's what I love about this dynamic here.
Yeah, something I would definitely piggyback off of that, John, is that who you are as a leader to your direct reports is who you are as a leader to your peers, is who you are as a leader to your friends, to your family, and the list goes on and on and on. You just have a different end goal, right? Like sometimes it's financial and it's actually like, we need to drive this business to this level and here's how we're going to do it. But if I didn't have the support of my peers or the collaboration from my team, regardless of if it's this team giving me pointers when I'm leading coaching calls, or the support of my peers at Lululemon, or the support of Drew at home, like I would not be successful regardless, like among the building the ultimate life, right? Or building your best life that we are so focused on helping all these individuals create. It's recognizing that there is a place for everyone, and how I show up in one place is how I should show up in every aspect.
Absolutely. So let's get down into some real tangible experiences, tips, feedback, that sort of thing. So when you both were young leaders, again, in your early 20s, what were some of the roadblocks or challenges that you faced? Maybe I'll just keep this order going. Christina, do you want to start us off? What were some of the challenges you dealt with?
Yeah, so there was a couple different challenges, and they ranged from being over supervised, so where I felt I was micromanaged and had no freedom to develop my own best practices or my own path to success, to when I felt under supervised. So then I just felt like I was just floating in the breeze and had no idea what my personal manager thought of my performance, or where I could be better, or where I had no idea anything. I was just out there on my own. And what I realized is that both styles, while they are completely on opposite sides of the spectrum, they made me question my worth. So whether it was the over supervision that made me think like, well, you don't trust me, so why should I even try, to the under supervised position where it's like, you've given me so much freedom, I don't even know where to start. So they both led me to shut down essentially in one aspect or the other, and ultimately leave those careers. You know, like I'm not with either of those managers anymore. So my buy-in to the company didn't change. I don't disrespect any of my previous employers as a company, but I would not want to really work for them necessarily again because of specific experiences with my manager. So it was kind of that self-worth and questioning my role, and ultimately led me to changing them from that new management perspective. And then as a manager myself, some of the things that I took into consideration was, did the person that I just interacted with leave better after our conversation? Are they clear on my expectations? And do they have the support to complete that? So that, and it's not perfect every time. I'm human. I'm not this like superior ultimate manager. But if I use those lenses when I look at whether it's a project or personal development or whatever it is, then that's helped me ultimately have a better relationship with those that report to me, and create a circle of trust, so that if I'm out of integrity with one of those areas, they're comfortable to come and talk to me and say what they need. So so that was kind of my journey and my learnings as a young manager into where I'm at now.
I want to point out something that you said that I think a lot of young managers go through, and that is how they're taught how to be a manager. So the reality is, like, in a lot of companies, we don't teach people how to manage. And so therefore the only way we learn is based on who we've seen do it before. So you're really right at the luck of the draw as to, have you had good managers in the past, bad managers in the past? Who do you have currently, right? Because even if you're a leader, you still answer to someone. So I think that's really interesting as to, whether you're over supervised, under supervised, or you hit that Goldilocks just right? Like, it makes a big difference because, hopefully companies are starting to invest in teaching their managers how to manage. I know that's why we developed our Thriving Leader program, was to help those people learn how to manage others. But the reality is that doesn't always happen. So it is highly dependent on who you've seen manage in the past. John, what about you? What were some challenges or roadblocks that you faced as you moved into a management position?
Yeah, so part of it, I'm going to piggyback off Christina, is, like, what was a leader really? Like, I had no formal training of what a leader was. I kind of got through into this so-called leadership role, right? And like, all of a sudden I have these direct reports, or these people I'm trying to lead, and really I have their career in my hands, right? So for me, it was like, now what is my role? Like, what do I do? For me, I had to get over like myself a little bit, if that makes sense, right? So I had to realize that I didn't have all the answers, right? I'm not going to have all the answers, and nor should I have all the answers, right? And that's where I had to lean on my team for that. So my purpose really, and my role as a leader that I found out, was that I had to develop my team. I basically just had to be that person that guided the team and make sure that they were successful as individuals and as a team. And it took me a while to kind of figure that out, to get over myself. So really my roadblock was myself, to get, to put my ego aside, get over my own success and my own virtues or whatever, and help my team lead. And once I got over that, once I started working on my team and developing them, that's when I feel like I became a better leader. And that's when I really kind of understood what leadership is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about later is the idea of understanding expectations of others, whether that's the people who report to you or the people you report to. Because I think that's so true, is oftentimes we promote people into a management position because they were good at what they used to do. And again, it goes back to, we don't train people how to manage, but the reality is we also don't tell them what we expect of them as a manager. We don't tell them how they should lead their team. We don't tell them, what are the expectations of a leader, right? Like, so there's a lot of just unknowns quite often when we move people into a leadership role. So I think that's a totally fair challenge to have to navigate through if no one's given you that direction.
So we've all had experience, within a company where there's some good, like, great leaders that we would like to be. Like, that's like the example that we should be, right? Of the leader that we should be. And then there's some other leaders that are probably not real good, right? And they probably shouldn't be in the position they are in, right? So we've had that experience, right? So for me, what I found is, like, as I was trying to figure out what my role is, how do I become a better leader? For me, it was like, I needed to spend more time with the good leaders, but in all reality, they didn't really have time for me, because they're busy. And I mean, that's fair. I understand. So for me, I had to take it upon myself to develop myself. So that's when, and I had a good boss that I think that he's one of the better leaders that I've been around. But he did take little bits of time, and he pushed me to figure it out for myself, right? Instead of just here, this is what a leader should be in this package, right? But no, he pushed me to figure it out myself. So I read the books, I listened to YouTube and podcasts, and figured out and took bits and pieces of all this leadership all these leadership styles and then developed my own, right? And instead of trying to copy somebody else's. And I think that's what's important. And, or what I believe is important is if you can be authentic in your leadership style, right? Because that's who people are going to follow. They're going to follow someone that's authentic and somebody who is who they say they are, and it took me a while to kind of figure that out. But it was when we don't have that mentor there to kind of help us and tell us what to do, we got to take it upon ourselves to do it and figure it out, and that was a little bit of a challenge for me. Is that there was kind of an example, but I didn't have the time to spend with those leaders to really learn. So I just had to do it myself, which turned out pretty good, I think.
I'd agree.
Yeah, John, I think that's such a great call out, is that your development is your responsibility, whether you have a manager or not. Some of my best employees, I don't sit around and think at night like, I wonder what Jill wants to sit around. I don't have an employee named Jill, so if anyone from my team listens to this, they'll be like, what? But anyway, what Jill wants to be developed in. But what I can look at is what Jill's actively pursuing herself to know, like, okay, I can make time for a 30-minute conversation to give her some pointers or connect her to who's better than me at this, because that's the biggest thing as a manager is you don't need to know all the answers, but you need to know who has them so that you can connect your team or yourself to that individual when you need that specific answer. And that the biggest piece of that is my employee developing themselves so that I even know what they want to know. Because if I'm spending time training you in operations and you have no passion to grow there, I'm going to exhaust you and you're going to leave me, because you're going to be like, all Christina wants to talk to me about is operations. And I want to learn about building relationships and networking, right? So or social media, or insert whatever area of interest here, right? So if there's anyone listening that's frustrated because they feel like their managers aren't giving them the information that they need, have you shared with them what you want to know? And do you have a performance gap? Is that why they're sharing what you don't want to know? So getting curious about that and starting that conversation, being an activator around that.
I think that's a really good point. One of the roadblocks or challenges that I faced that, probably to an extent we all face in a lot of different roles, and management is just one of them, is believing in myself enough that I deserve to be there, right? I think a lot of us have heard of imposter syndrome, like, oh my gosh, I don't deserve to be here, and someday somebody else is going to finally figure that out. That was real for me. Honestly, that's the reason why when somebody said, hey, I want to promote you into a supervisor position, that I said no, because I did not see myself as someone capable of doing that yet. I think I always thought maybe down the road, but definitely not that soon. And so that was a challenge for me that, I joke that it only took me 2 months to finally get my head on straight and take that promotion. But it took those 2 months for me to realize, oh, what that other person is seeing in me is real. I am capable of doing this. I'm already doing it in a lot of different ways. So that took some self-reflection to really get to the point where it's like, oh, okay, I should trust myself more, because clearly other people around me trust me. And so I'm the last one to jump on this train, apparently. But I would say that was probably my biggest challenge, is just believing that I was qualified to be in the position in the first place. I put 2 others on our list that I just want to touch base on and get some of your feedback on, because I don't know that these were necessarily challenges that I struggled with. Maybe the 2 of you could weigh in on that. But they're ones that I hear either from people who are early in their career who aspire to be in a leadership position, or who have been moved into a leadership position and are having trouble getting buy-in from people around them. So the 2 things that I have heard is from folks who are interested in a leadership position but can't seem to get the promotion because they haven't, quote unquote, paid their dues yet. right? So maybe somebody has said to them, oh, that position's not available to you until you've put in X number of years, or, oh, no, you have to work your way through this chain of processes or positions until so you can get there. So I'm curious, have either of you run into that situation, or would you have suggestions as to how somebody might deal with it?
Yeah, my company actually, you cannot grow into a new role unless you've developed someone into your current role. So while you might be role ready, you're not going anywhere if you don't have a successor that can move seamlessly into the position you currently hold. And that can be frustrating sometimes, because sometimes you're on totally different development calendars where something might come a little bit more naturally for you. So you're role ready, and then you're sitting there with someone that you're like, crap, you're 3 to 6 months out. I get frustrated by that very easily. And because I'm like, go, 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 go. But what I will say has been one of the benefits of that is that I really had to ask myself, like, am I a pro at this role? And if I can't get this person up to speed on how to do what I do, then I'm not a pro, because I've not developed them in a powerful way. So I technically am not role ready. And that was a hard process for me to go through, ego-wise, and learning that my ego is not my amigo. And yeah, I cannot come up with a saying for any of those things, because that was literally what I had to do to kind of slow myself down. And then there are some companies that say you need to be enrolled for 2 years before you get promoted. And to that I say, that's not true. And maybe monitor how you say that and who you say that to. But if you're role ready, then don't limit yourself because there's a calendar year that's like the norm. You don't have to be the norm. It might take you 2 years to be role ready. It might take you 4, or it may take you 6 months. So if you know your worth, add tax, and then make sure you're communicating that to your boss and sharing, like, here's where I'm winning, here's where I'm seeing opportunities, so that you're constantly developing. Again, that conversation around your development. If everyone's on the same page, then they might actually decide you're role ready before you do, which is the situation you were in, Amanda. Like, they knew what you were up to, and you needed a little more time to process, and that's okay too. So it's just like knowing what you're uniquely qualified to bring to the table, and not letting what the normal rule of thumb is control you and deflate you, because that doesn't mean that has to be your normal.
Absolutely. I think this is really a 2-part challenge. So on one hand, if you are the person who is interested in moving into a new role, but you're either getting messages or you're making messages up in your head, because I know some people who do this too, that says, I can't move into that role until I've been here or been in my current role for a certain amount of time. If you think you are ready, to use your language, Christina, if you think you are role ready, then that's on you to go communicate the results that you have had that make you role ready. So you get to go do a sales pitch, right? And so you get to prove why you don't need another year to be ready for this job, why you are ready to step into it now. To be real honest, we're not always good at that sales pitch. Again, this goes back to what I was not very good at, and especially, not that this doesn't happen with everybody, but I do want to call out, especially women are really bad at feeling as though they need to meet every single bullet point on the job description before they even throw their name in the hat. I think other people do that, but we know that it is especially prominent amongst young women. So again, if you think you're ready and you think you meet like 80% of the qualifications, go after it. Go put your name in the hat and give it a go. So I think that's like the one side of the paying your dues argument. The other side is, if you are a company that has the mindset that someone cannot lead until they've been there 5, 10, 15 years, you are going to get left behind. I'm going to be really super honest. That was something I really respected in the company that I used to work for. Is it was based on, can you do the next job? If you can do the next job, I do not care how old you are. And so like I got a promotion pretty much on calendar every year because I demonstrated that could do the job and move my way up. There were other people who were in roles longer because they needed the extra time to work into that. But if you're a company who is only looking at the quantity of time someone spends in any given role, I think you're really going to struggle with a succession plan for who's going to replace your people at the top in the long run. So it's a two-parter. The other challenge that I hear people talk about is the idea of earning respect, specifically earning respect from your team. So let's say you've been moved into a management position. You are the formal leader. You are the boss. And now you've got to get your team to buy in to follow you. And I think that's especially hard for people who are young, but also who maybe look young. I know that's something that I've always struggled with, is I look like I'm 16. So, that's a challenge. So John, I'm curious, in your role when you were at the nutrition company, I believe you had some people on your team who were older or farther along in their career than you were. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. There was people much older than I was.
Yeah. So how did you go about getting their respect?
So this is actually something that I had asked a fellow leader within the company about, because when I was taking on some of these individuals that were a little bit older than myself, I was like, how do I earn the respect, right? So I went out and asked it, and one little piece of advice that I got, and I don't know if it's the best advice, but the one piece of advice I got was just work harder than them. And I don't know if that's the best advice, but it helped break the barrier for sure for at least this one individual, my barn manager, right? So I was out there sweating with him. Like when he was out in the barn, I wasn't just coordinating the research and making sure the trials were getting done. I was out there in the barn working side by side with him, working up a sweat, and doing all the grunt work alongside with him. And that was the time that we could actually bond, and that's when I earned his respect a little bit too. But I think, and that helped me. But I think the one thing for me that helps earn respect is to give respect back, because like when you're in a position like that, like they are going to look at you like, what is this? How is this kid going to lead me? I've been in this field or this career for 20 plus years, he's not even 20 years old, so like for me, it's just give respect back and be a little bit humble, and then like be confident in yourself and your abilities. Like what you mentioned earlier, Amanda, is believe in yourself and believe in what you can do, but also know exactly where you stand. So like, don't think you know everything, because they've got 20 plus years of experience, 30 plus years of experience, I guess in this one individual's case, of things that I don't know. Right. So, and I knew that, and I would ask him, I'm like, okay, so this has been my experience. Let me ask you, what is your experience? Like how should we do this? And let's, instead of me just making up the rules and, cracking the whip, like, let's solve this as a problem or as a team, rather than just me. Let's figure it out together, and then by doing that, that's how I earn the respect, is kind of checking my ego at the door, giving them respect, and then getting them to buy in too. And then once they do that, then they kind of understand that you're not just out for yourself, and you're actually going to ask them for their opinion and take in their experience, and use it to help the, to help the team.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was thinking as you were talking is that if you can demonstrate that you'll go to bat for your team, like that will go a long way. And that can look a lot of different ways. It might mean getting in the trenches with them and doing the work that needs to be done. It also might mean going to your bosses and selling something that your team wants to accomplish. Like if your team can see, like, I will stand up for you, I will go to bat for you, I will be there with you when things are hard, that goes a long way in earning respect. But the point I really want to emphasize that you said, John, is you've got to respect yourself in order to have others respect you. So that goes to believing in yourself, trusting in yourself. because that energy will emanate and people will flock to that for sure. For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to keep us moving because we have so much good stuff to talk about on this topic, but I also know that we all have other things we need to get done today. So let's keep rolling. The next topic that I wanted to dig into is, what do you wish that you had known when you were a young leader? So John, I'm going to go back to you. What was something that you, kind of looking back now, you wish you had known when you first got promoted into a management role?
There's so many things. I can't even narrow it down to one. But one thing is, one of the bigger things I think is be an advocate for myself, speak up for myself and share what my true thoughts were. As I look back about some of the mistakes I had done as a young leader, is to not stick up for myself. Because there was a lot of times that I'd be sitting in a meeting with all these PhDs, and I don't have a PhD, if you didn't know. You could probably tell by the way I speak. But it's pretty intimidating. And you sit in a round table full of PhDs, it takes a lot of courage to speak up and share your opinions. And there was a lot of times that I thought that we should have done something differently as far as the research side goes, for example, but I didn't speak up. And turns out, a month or two down the road, while we're that far into a trial, that very thing came up and destroyed our trial. And I wish I would have spoke up. And if I would have spoke up, we could have, the trial could have been saved, or that issue would have been prevented. So for me, it was don't be afraid to speak up. That is how you learn, and if you speak up and somebody says, no, you're wrong, well, no big deal. Now you know, right? But I was too afraid to speak up sometimes, and share my opinion, and that could have saved us a lot. Probably saved us a lot of money and time on these trials. And that's probably the biggest thing that I wish I would have known as a young leader, is just to be an advocate of myself. Speak up when you feel like you need to, when you call, because we all know what that feels like when you feel like you should speak up and share your opinion. That's probably the biggest thing for me.
Gotcha. Definitely advocate for yourself. That goes at a lot of levels, but definitely as a young leader, especially when you now as a leader start sitting in on some of these higher level meetings, right? Because if you're a team manager, now you might be involved in, management meetings, executive team meetings, so on and so forth, that you might not have been in your previous role. So I think that's a really good one, John. I like that. Christina, what about you? What's some things that you wish you would have known when you were kind of first put in a management role?
Yeah. First thing is definitely be ready for any response when you are speaking up. I had a really hard time in the beginning controlling my reactions if I had already decided how the conversation should go and then it didn't go that way. So that's definitely one big piece. And again, it's eliminating ego from the conversation. And then the other piece is, the better you listen, the more successful you'll be. So being a learner always, getting curious always, and really listening with the intention to know and understand rather than the intention to respond will elevate you. And I wish I would have learned that a little bit earlier on, rather than feeling like I needed to always project myself in a certain way and I needed to be a bulldozer and I needed to go in and rule the room and make sure everyone knew I was in there and all of these things. And, that served a purpose at first when it was surface level. And then once it got a little bit deeper, there were a lot more learnings that were to be had, for sure.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Lots of listening.
Mm-hmm.
The ones for me that I wish I had known, the first two kind of go hand in hand. So I wish I had known that it's okay to create your own leadership style based on your strengths. And as part of that just because you're the boss doesn't mean you have to be bossy or doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about it, right? When I first got promoted into a supervisor role, another reason besides the fact that I didn't really believe in myself that I didn't want the role is because I had in my head that like the boss has to be this really buttoned up, kind of tightwad, grumpy, whatever, which I don't know why I had that belief, because I definitely didn't have managers who were like that. But for whatever reason, like I just had a negative connotation in my head of what it means to be the boss. And so for me, I wish I would have learned a little earlier that every manager is different and that you can create your own leadership style based on kind of who you are. I had a really good manager who was really super strategic thinking and big picture and really creative. And those aren't necessarily the same strengths I have, whereas I might lead from a place of, how can we be really buttoned up and deliver the best possible product because I'm super detail oriented, but how can we all keep growing because I'm also high self-improvement. So like I manage and I lead from a different place than maybe other managers would. And so I wish I kind of would have learned that a little bit earlier, because I think it would have made it easier on myself. And then the second lesson that I wish I would have learned a little earlier is that sometimes people will see your leadership potential before you do, right? So John, you earned that award. Christina, you got put in that executive development program. I got told I should be promoted, and so sometimes because we're stuck in our own heads and we see our own flaws, we see our own insecurities, that sometimes other people will see our potential before we do. And I guess the lesson that I now know that I wish I had learned earlier is that if you trust the person who sees your potential, trust that their opinion is accurate. Even if you might not believe it, if you trust them, trust that their opinion of you is pretty good. And because that was what was for me, the manager who was trying to promote me, like I really trusted her. And so I wish that I would have trusted that if she said I was ready, then I was probably ready. But you live and learn. So all righty. We are winding down. And so I want to take us here into our last question, which is, why do you think it is important to give young professionals the opportunity to lead? So we're going to switch gears, switch perspective. I hope I just ran into my mic. I hope that but we're going to switch perspectives here. So we have been talking, advice for young leaders. But let's switch gears and look at those who are in leadership positions today. Why should they, when they have a new management role or they have a promotion that needs to happen or they have a new position that's opened up, why should they consider some of their young professionals as possible people to fill those roles? Christina, I'm going to go to you first. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So the first one is, if they never try, then you'll never know and they'll never know. So your responsibility as a manager is to train these individuals, and they're trusting you with their career. So you owe it to them to trust them with the ability to do things and giving them the space to fail faster. So setting them up with the intention of like, this is the training piece that I'm giving you. So you are clear on your expectations. And then I'm going to give you space to experience it on your own and try it here. And we're going to come back for a coaching style of conversation, where I can give you direct feedback about what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, because they might not fail, but the faster they fail, the faster they learn, and the faster they succeed, the faster they learn. So it's up to you to provide them with that opportunity. And the last piece that I like to leave is if I were hit by a bus tomorrow, would my whole team suffer because I didn't develop someone to take my role? And if my answer is yes, then I'm not doing my job. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think so Christina and I were on a coaching call yesterday, and it was in a little different context, but we used the hit by a bus scenario. It's a really good perspective shift if you think you are like the only one who can do a job or you're the only one who can lead. Like, start asking yourself, if I were hit by a bus tomorrow, what would I do? And I think that's an excellent application in this conversation as well. John, what about you? Why should current managers start looking to their young professionals to fill leadership roles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like I don't know how this saying exactly goes, but like the company lives and dies by the leader, right? So if if we're not developing these young leaders, as they're coming into a company, then who's going to lead the company in the future? Like once that manager gets to the retirement age, or leaves the company or gets hit by a bus, right? Hopefully not. Who's going to fill their shoes? Right. And I think that's where us young professionals have to step up, and we have to learn how to lead, but we have to be given that opportunity. Right. So, I mean, part of it goes to the current leaders right now in the organizations to give us that opportunity and let us develop our leadership style and like Christina said, coach us into it a little bit. Right. But as leaders, or as young professionals, we also have to be taking the necessary steps to develop ourselves so we are ready when our leader calls us and say, hey, let's help you out a little bit in your career and get you to leading people. So I think it goes both ways. But the thing is like we are the future. Right. So we have to like learn how to lead sometime. And the best way, so I was listening to a podcast the other day. Players learn how to play the game during the game. And that's how leaders learn how to lead, is they learn how to lead when they're leading people. Because that's when they make the mistakes, they learn, right, from their mistakes, and then they can grow. And I think that's what we need to do, is bring these young people in and start developing them at a young age so they can become the leader that we need them to be for our companies for the future, to survive, really, for our companies to survive.
There's a couple of things in there that I think are really important. And one is that it's almost like succession planning, right? So obviously a lot of the clients we work with are in agriculture, and we're always talking about succession planning with the farm. Where are we going to hand the farm to in the next generation? Who's going to keep the farm going in the future, right? But we don't always talk about that in the business world. So if you're a manager now, think about it as if it's your succession plan. Who's going to fill your role in the future? Who's going to take this business from where it is today to where it could be 10, 20, 50 years from now? It is just like creating a succession plan on the farm, only for your business. The second piece of that, though, is instead of waiting until all of our baby boomers, all of our older Xers retire and all that knowledge and skill goes with them, like let's develop the next generation of leaders today while that knowledge and skill is still in the office and can be used to mentor those folks, right? Like let's not wait until that knowledge and skill goes out the door and then we're here trying to pick up the pieces and figure it out. I love when I talk to companies who maybe they send somebody to training with us, and maybe they might not tell that person, but they tell us on the manager calls, right? Like, I'm grooming this person to be the next GM, or I'm training this person to be the next sales manager, right? Like, or whatever it is, because I know they're thinking in the long run, that they're thinking beyond the current role that this person is in, and they're actually proactively preparing them. So that's something to think about as you look through your organization. Who is there today that could be in your spot someday? And if you say no one, back to Christina's point, like you got some work to do. It's much easier to build someone from within than to constantly have to go find somebody from without. Not that there aren't reasons for going outside of, but like homegrown talent is really good. So that's kind of John and Christina on some things that I was picking up from you. I guess the other just take home message that I would send on this topic is that leadership ability and age are not directly correlated, right? Like there's nothing that says, oh, because you're 35, now you'll be a good manager. Like that's dumb. Although honestly, I think there are some companies out there that think that like, oh, you're going to have some milestone birthday and now you're qualified to manage others, right? Like that's really dumb. So what I would actually push for is like, what are the strengths of a person that makes them potentially be a good leader? So, maybe, we have some clients who are really high developing others' strengths. That person might be a really good manager, right? So now it's giving them the experience to apply that in a management setting. So instead of waiting for the milestone birthday, like provide people with opportunities and then help them get the experience to flesh out that skill a little bit, because they will never, one of you already said this, but they will never learn to lead if they don't practice. So it's about giving people the opportunity to practice, so that when that succession planning time comes, somebody is able to step into your shoes. So good conversation, everybody. I know Christina is off to go do some training with some folks. I'm sure John has got some exciting things lined up this afternoon. I've got to go jump on a coaching call. So we're going to wrap this bad boy up for the day. John, Christina, thank you so much for coming on the show. For both of you, this is your second episode back, so I'm glad we didn't scare you off the first time. And as always, if you like what you hear, jump on over to markjeweltraining.com. We've got lots of other great resources, and we hope to connect with you there, maybe out on one of our social media channels. So as always, survival is dead, and it's your time to thrive today. Go get it. Thanks for tuning in to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in this episode by heading over to markjeweltraining.com/podcast. And if you feel so inclined, we'd love it if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. That's what helps us move up in the charts so that more people can find us and start their surviving to thriving journey. See you next week.